Nathaniel, you said you don't have a PowerPoint, so
No.
you can just perhaps take the place of while I introduce you very briefly. So Nathaniel Chimhete is a senior lecturer at the Department of History, Heritage and Knowledge System at the University of Zimbabwe. Like Salvatore, he obtained his PhD in history at the University of Iowa in 2013, and he has a Master MBA degree also at the University of Zimbabwe, specifically in economic history. He has several publications, just few I would like to mention here. Like the one that will also be discussed in the next seminar is about she beans, alcohol, and nation building. So we remain in the same argument in Zimbabwe, 1980-1989, that came out in 2022 in the Canadian Journal of African Studies, which is a research on the project imposed by the state to ban the selling of alcohol in the street in this place called Shibins, who were places where, of course, alcohol was sold without license and that were held by the soul queens who brewed and sold it. And this topic will be presented at IMAF, at the next IMAF seminar on the 16th of January, so I really invite you to come. He has worked also on guerrilla fighters on the Zimbabwe African Nation Union and the relation with the civilian in Udiangari and Zimbabwe from 1975 to 1980s, looking at the agency of rural community in their interaction with fighters, for instance, through songs, nicknames, name given to children of guerrilla fighters and local women. He has also been working on Tanzania. He has been as an article on the gold boom of the 1970s that coincided with a period of, at a national scale, of high inflation, unemployment, and economic crisis, and how this gold boom in Tanzania, in fact, interacted and created a kind of a bubble within this national economy. And finally is one of the editors of the volume Zimbos Never Die, Negotiating Survival in a Challenge Economy, 1992 to 2015, with a group of editors published by Brill in 2023, which is an economic history of Zimbabwe from the late 20th century that explore how Zimbabwean society and its institution has survived to continuous economic crisis. We discovered Nathaniel because as the story is that you apply to be part of the summer school, and we discovered that you are way too senior to be a student in the summer school, and we actually hunted you to come here in Paris and develop your own research project for 2 months within the framework of the project. Even if Zimbabwe is not a part of the countries we study, your research was too interesting for us to let it go. And in fact, just in general, we notice really an attention at the grassroots and from below and on women, which is really important for us. So we are very happy to have you here. Please, the floor is yours now.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Let me start with the topic, don't be a dead Chakati Chapera, which basically means wife. In my local language, don't be dead Chakapera simply means don't say this and that is finished with the wife. Mm-hmm. So the title of the presentation, don't be this and that is finished, wife. Go to school, work, and empower yourself. Kitchen parties in Harare, Zimbabwe in 21st century. Oh, so maybe I should start by defining what kitchen parties are within the context of Zimbabwe, which are basically advice-giving ceremonies that are conducted just before the bride weds, but after the payment of lobola. So usually they are held a week before the wedding, before the lady is stayed with the husband. Those are called kitchen parties. So called because when they appeared on the scene in the 1980s, most of the gifts that were given to women were kitchen utensils, pots, cups, and so on, hence the name kitchen parties. So we are tracing maybe the evolution of this institution from the 1980s when they appeared on the scene up to the present moment. Basically, we are saying since their introduction in Zimbabwe in the 1980s, kitchen parties have evolved. They are now empowering. When they were introduced, they were sort of a conservative institution. The message that was impacted these institutions was mainly how do you handle a husband in the bedroom? And how also do you deal with the relatives of the husband? That was the message when they appeared on the scene in the 1960s. So even if you look at the literature, the few articles that are there on the subject, they tend to depict a kitchen party as an institution that is oppressive even up to now, as an institution that is unchanging, that is an urban institution, yes, but is continuing the values and norms that reinforce patriarchy in an urban setting. So there are maybe two problems with that approach. One, it seems the literature that is there does not give enough agency to women and brides, young women in general, mostly because they focus on maybe structures, norms, and the advice that is given at these meetings, but not exactly how the women receive the advice and how they react to the advice given. So we are trying to look at maybe how the women receive the advice and how they act upon the advice. Because these women, the young women who are taught at this meeting, they don't just swallow hook, line, and sinker, maybe the message preached at this. So to do this, we are using the concept of hegemony. And this allows us to see power displayed at these meetings as interactive. Yes, they say what they want. They think is good for the young women, but the young women, they don't just accept the message. They act on the message that they receive. So generally, we argue that they have been maybe counterfeiting culture. What is now being displayed at current kitchen parties, sort of a counterfeiting culture that they accept that they receive, but at the same time, they also ignore and invent new norms and values in these kitchen parties. So we are looking at this counterfeited culture. So basically the argument that the women themselves, they have been redefining the culture of the kitchen parties, the young women themselves. And they are able to do so because the elderly women that are supposed to give this advice, they are also divided among themselves. They don't speak with one voice, so they also take advantage of that. But maybe I should have mentioned this at the beginning that I'm co-authoring this paper with someone else, Aldrin Magaya, who is maybe 3 years younger than me or 4 years younger than me. So that also posed the problem. How were we able to conduct this type of research? Because we are actually talking about the private spaces. Ordinarily, men are not allowed at this gathering. These are all women gatherings. So to do this, of course, we interviewed women we knew already first. And in some cases, we also used the WhatsApp online interviews to create sort of maybe social distance. In some cases, actually, the women requested that we switch off the video function, which we did. Of course, we lost something. The schools and demonstrations that are necessary in communication. But I think we gained something from that. But all in all, I mean, from our interaction with these people, the women, young women, it seems the image that we got is that kitchen parties as sites, they are now sites of descended freedom. That this is a place where women are now free to challenge traditional norms. They are free to say whatever they want, to wear whatever they want, and even what happens in kitchen parties at those sites, it shows people who are empowered. If the empowerment does not transcend maybe the kitchen parties themselves, it at least shows maybe their hopes and dreams in marriages, in the bedrooms, and so on. So maybe the first section of our paper looks at maybe the origins and development of kitchen parties. Basically, kitchen parties in Zimbabwe, as I said, they emerged in the 1980s and they developed, it was as a result of the fusion of three traditions. One, local tradition, which is a result of a consequence of urbanization, which dislocated African families. So the movement of Africans from rural areas into urban centers, disrupting families, and in the process, of course, creating what Onyego termed fictive families. And then two, we also have maybe a regional influence. One of the reasons why kitchen parties emerged on the scene in the 1980s, independence in 1980. What independence does in Zimbabwe, we see the retaining of migrants from neighboring countries, especially from Tanzania, Zambia, and Malawi. People from Zambia and Malawi in particular, they had a well-developed culture for kitchen party, developing from maybe their Chinamwari initiation. So that's the third factor. And then the third factor is the influence of Western education in Christianity. Kitchen parties in the Harare, they first emerge among the educated, the elite, and the middle class. So definitely there was an influence of what women were taught in schools during the colonial times, and also in the 1980s, the home economic classes, where they were taught how to arrange things in the kitchen, how to make your bed, and so on. So those are some of the things that were taught at kitchen parties. So when they emerged in the 1980s, it was sort of a conservative institution, but at the same time, subversive. Conservative in the sense that at the kitchen parties, the elderly women taught young women or reinforced patriarchy. But at the same time, subversive in the sense that the dancing that was done at these kitchen parties, French dancing that was foreign to Zimbabwe, mostly came from Zambia and also Malawi. So elders and traditional leaders saw that as maybe disruptive of African culture, to an extent that even today, most men are not comfortable with their wives going to kitchen parties. The thinking is kitchen parties is for prostitutes.
Wow.
Partly because of the kind of dancing and sometimes advice that they receive. So with time in the 1990s, churches started to organize their own kitchen parties because they didn't want how the message was transmitted to the young people. So we end up in the 1990s having two types of kitchen parties broadly. One that were Christian oriented and the second one that were secular. And our focus is on those secular kitchen parties that we think are empowering to women. So we now move on to kitchen parties in Harare from 2000 to present. That's our focus. As I've said, I think in most cases, scholars view kitchen parties as places where the elder teach young women conservative values. We are saying, yes, there are certain kitchen parties that still continue with this tradition, but there are some that have changed. So probably I will look at maybe some aspects of kitchen parties that we think are empowering women. Not that we think is, but what the women we talk to think they are empowering to them. And of course, start with the most controversial of them, which is labia enlargement or pulling, which some scholars consider as part of gender-based violence. Most of the women we talked to, because they were university graduates, they did not believe that this is a form of gender-based violence. First of all, no one is forced to do this at kitchen parties. Second, they emphasize the benefits that accrue to them as a result of large beer enlargement or pulling. One of which is maybe they said is pleasure during sex because of increased friction and so on. And also, they also emphasize the fact that it's very difficult, if not almost impossible, to have sex with a woman who is not prepared to sleep with you if your labia has been enlarged. For you to penetrate, the woman must be aroused. Otherwise, it's almost impossible to penetrate. So for them, you can't simply force someone without, first of all, maybe stimulating the woman. So the point that they emphasize, of course, is labia pulling. It exposes nerves that are essential for sexual stimulation. I will leave some aspects and then, of course, so one thing that is also emphasized in those teaching class is maybe how to have sex in the bedroom. And if you go on attend those traditional kitchen parties, of course, let me say, in most African societies, Southern African societies, there is a particular way you should have sex in the bedroom. There are certain sex types positions that you should have in the bedroom, and there are those that are not acceptable. And the most common one is the missionary style, where the husband is on top. You can't, for people who are probably my age and older, they can't imagine a husband or a woman being on top. It's the invasion of gender roles in the home. You are basically saying someone is not man enough. But in kitchen parties, women are told, try this, visit porno sites to make your marriage enjoyable. So this way we are saying to women involved, the younger generation, this is empowering. But of course, it's also very difficult to introduce what they have learned back home because the husband will ask, where did you learn about this? But for them, it's empowering. So we asked maybe one lady, actually a university lecturer, but how do you say a sex position is empowering? He said, any sex position in which you are on top is empowering too. women. And then she said, how? And this is what she said. I read. I will be the one doing almost everything. I am dominant in the sense that I am setting the pace, that is the rhythmic paces of sex. I am setting the tone. I am setting, or that's determine who is going to be pleasured first, whether I go too slow for my pleasure or too fast for his pleasure. The concept of kutimbirirwa, that's literally to be physically subdued, to have a missionary style is to be dominated. So at kitchen parties, we are told, don't be dominated. So, one of the women we also interviewed went on to said, being on top, she said, when on top, I can control the duration of sex, of the sex act. I can slow the pace if I discover that my man is about to ejaculate and I am not yet ready. I can determine the duration because I'll be the one in control. So for women who are told this is not how to do it, this is sort of maybe empowering. But of course, men are uncomfortable with that. So for most men, I think the cowgirl style suggests not only the feminization of the husband in the bedroom, but also the invasion of gender roles. We can also look at maybe the hidden world of women's sentiments by the names that they give themselves. Unfortunately, they are in show now, but I will read maybe some of them. Like, oh, it's a bit vulgar, but okay, maybe I will skip this part.
Don't feel shy. I mean, I think we are ready for that.
Oh, one of them is yes, pain is good, and then the other one makes pains cry. There are so many of these names. They also give themselves when they arrive at kitchen parties. So you come from your home as my Chimhete or Miss Chimhete, but when you arrive at the kitchen party, you adopt a new name. That's the concept. Like Bisa Bruga first, remove your pens first. So if you look at these names closely, you see that the message that they give is empowering. At least at this kitchen party, they are freedom sites. If they don't get that freedom outside the kitchen party setting, they at least give some hint at their romantic and sexual dreams. You look closely at the names. In some cases, we have a situation where they pray in courts. But if you look at the prayer itself, it's also shows some empowerment. People who are happy at this kitchen party. I will read maybe one of the prayers that was quoted in a local newspaper. It's by a pastor, Rachel. So she prayed, let's close our eyes and pray, hallelujah. Us with the vaginas, earth with elongated labia, that's matinch. We want to thank all the vaginas that have gathered in this house, not forgetting ye the penis. We want to thank you, Lord, for your grace, which has allowed us to converse about intercourse. So if you look at this message, they are not conservative at all. They, in a way, sort of subvert patriarchal authority. So at kitchen parties, they are able to say things that they are not able to say outside kitchen party settings because it's a woman-only gathering. They are able to dress what they want. In most cases, when they arrive at kitchen parties, they change into new outfits that their husbands don't even know that they exist. And that's common. And if you look also at the message, why this is happening, it's partly because elderly women themselves, they don't agree on the message that is imparted. So it's common to a pastor or an elderly woman impact knowledge that is conservative, that you should pray if your husband strays, if your husband cheats, pray about it. And then someone in the crowd said, no, don't do that. If he cheats, cheat also. That's common. We call this members of the, Maziro committee, sort of informal groups of people who have a different ideology. So it's common to have this kind of people, especially single women. They give advice informally that is contrary to official message that is often given in this. So what is this suggests is that the organizers, or even the speakers at kitchen parties, they do not define entirely what happens at kitchen parties. Those who attended kitchen parties, they also receive message informally from people who attend, who have a different ideology. I think that's the message here. So, of course, there's no way of knowing what message do these young women who attend these ceremonies come up with. They receive conflicting advice. So it seems some women are now attending kitchen parties as a ritual. It's something that should be done if you are from a relatively rich family. But they don't take the message that they get there seriously, partly because by the time they get married after finishing university and so on, they would have gained access to the internet. They will have gathered information of friends and so on. So elders are no longer the only sources of information. In some cases, we also have women are able to circumvent other institutions and practices that are oppressive to them at these kitchen parties. One example that they are able to circumvent is the inheritance institution. In a patriarchal society, normally wealth goes to the husband. In the case of divorce, sometimes women lose everything. So in order to circumvent this practice, mothers, aunts, and so on, they give gifts at kitchen parties before they wed officially. So in the event of an event, if you are given a house, the house belongs to you. If you are given a car, the car belongs to you. So that way, it has been empowering. If you also look at maybe the message itself, in the 1980s, when kitchen parties appeared on the scene, it was mostly about sex, how to handle the husband in the bedroom, how to deal with your in-laws. Now they invite doctors.
Okay.
Talk about sexual health.
Wow.
They invite lawyers. They talk about financial management.
Wow.
So it's a movement away from the original message about how to handle the husband and also maintaining good relation with the in-laws. So we see a change. How am I doing on time? It's about 20 minutes. So we now have Kanban that have been created. So when someone is having a kitchen party, it's now common for people to hire a Kanban. But the Kanban is not only restricted itself to teaching on the particular day. They can go maybe for training for weeks, and so including maybe physical training. That is also important maybe in the bedroom, because the belief is in the bedroom, you are not supposed to be overpowered. If you are overpowered by a woman, then it shows your sign of maybe weakness as a man. Mm-hmm. So we can also look at maybe what happens at these kitchen parties. Of course, when they are teaching, they use what they call intimacy aids, artificial vaginas, dildos, and so on, in order to demonstrate how you should do it in the bedroom. But they also sell these commodities to women around. If your husband fails to satisfy you, no problem. You can have this. So to some women, that is liberating. You are moving away from this conception, can't say African conception, the belief that without the husband or without penis, a dick, then you can't have sex, satisfying sex. Because basically they are saying if he can't fulfill you, then use this. So this is a radical change from kitchen parties of the 1980s when they appeared on the scene. Actually, we asked the one professional woman about this, and then a response, she simply cited the local song. I read some of the lyrics. It's translated into English. What we want is to be happy, be it in a lodge or hotel, in a private room or the economy section. What we want is to reach our destination. Basically saying what we want is sexual satisfaction, whether with your husband or with the intimacy. It's okay. So we are saying there has been a change in kitchen party, and this change is sort of liberating to women. Gone is the idea that women cannot engage in fulfilling sex without a man or pretending to be happy or to have reached orgasm. They discuss these issues at kitchen party. So in our title, Chakati, the Chapera, don't be a housewife, empower yourself. We are simply trying to show that maybe the message taught at this gathering has changed. The message is now empowering, and men are not comfortable usually with this. We interviewed at least some men who quoted two, and they said, why are you even asking me this question about such positions? Do you want to turn my wife into a man? So men generally are not comfortable with kitchen parties. So because they see it as maybe subversive. And we are saying these kind of kitchen parties, the secular kitchen parties, are empowering. Thank you. That is summary.
Thank you so much for this passionate paper. I didn't expect it to be like that. So thank you so much. Okay. So I think the floor is open for a question from so Altair, please, you can start if you want.
Thank you very much, Nathaniel, and nice to meet you. I really enjoyed reading your paper and hearing your presentation, and I hope that we will have time to discuss it more in depth at IMAF during your stay. But for now, I have two quick questions. The first one is, could you give us a little bit more context about those kitchen parties? Because I understand that there are different types of kitchen parties. So those who are like church driven and other that are more family or friends driven, I don't know. So could you please tell us more about like who decides what kind of kitchen party a bride is going to attend? Is she the one who organizes it, or the organization is done by another person of the family or friend? Or is it even possible for a bride to have like a church kitchen party and a family or friend kitchen party? Like who is invited, like and who is not invited to those parties, and who decides, like, yeah, basically. You talked also about like the different things that are happening in these ceremonies, but so you mentioned presents, giving presents. You mentioned some talks, but I think I think about a ritual that happens in Zanzibar that is called Singo, that you might know. And also during these parties, there are like the bride is massaged. There is like henna paintings and stuff like that. So I was wondering if it was also happening in kitchen parties. And I was really interested by what you said about like the various influences that transformed or reshaped kitchen parties over time, and how this influence changed the way kitchen parties are like performed today, and the meaning that is attached to it by participants, and especially women. But I think we can also think about, and you mentioned it in your paper, but I would like to hear you more about it, but the other types of influence that might also change what's happening in these kitchen parties, and especially given that we're talking a lot about sexuality, I was wondering about like the influence of social media, internet, and pornography in particular, like in the content of those kitchen parties today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Altair. More question? Aurelio, then
Yes, I will just add to something that Altair has said. Thank you very much, Chimhete, for that. This idea of the geography of these kitchen parties and the types, specifically with this bride seek consent, some kind of consent, parents involved, for example, and I'll be interested in knowing whether parents refuse, some parents may refuse and say, no, you cannot attend this, maybe you can attend this, and what could be the reason? So I think that area of what kinds of kitchen parties are there, and who decides who attends what and why, and what are the reasons. I think that would be interesting. Then there's a question on how you theorize your work, and this idea of counterfeiting, Sarah Henry, I think. And what I have in mind is what counterfeiting is something plastic. So you take an original thing and then create some kind of a fake, something that is a copy of an original thing. I don't know whether that's how you're thinking about this work. When I read your paper, and theoretically, I'm imagining that it is more about women who are struggling with real life and who are trying to assemble various tools in order for them to transition to become wives. So it is not, I don't see it as the idea of counterfeit. The image it creates in my mind is something which is just copy an original thing without considering the context, and then get a copy of that. But I'm seeing it as a kind of creative process where women dealing with life in the city, women from other places, are trying to create something that can enable them to transition to become marriageable women, or to learn lessons of marriage. So theoretically, I don't know whether you can clarify that. Thank you very much.
Anne.
Thank you very much for your presentation, and thanks for the first questions. Just like Altair, I would like to know a bit more about what happens during a kitchen party ceremony. For example, the balance between the age groups. You said older women and younger women. So does it mean that the bride can invite women of her age who would then benefit from what she is taught? Or is she the only one who supposedly knows nothing about married life? And so the teaching is only targeted to one person? That's the kind of things that I'm wondering about. And then there's another question about the fact that it's called kitchen parties, and you said that it's called kitchen parties because a lot of kitchen utensils were given, at least when it started in the 1980s. But in a lot of African societies, cooking is a metaphor for having sex. So I was also wondering whether there was a sort of hidden agenda behind those kitchen parties when they, you know, were invented. That's all. Thanks.
My response?
I think you can take one more and then please.
Thank you so much, Nathaniel. I have been thinking loudly about this this presentation, and I think when we first met, we had also a discussion. And this reminds me of two issues. One is raised by Van Genep and Victor Turner working on the Congo forest about the ritual process. And I'm inviting you to think this as part of a ritual process, like what Eliud has rightly pointed out, but also like I'm sort of have trouble pronouncing
Altair.
yes, and even professor here. That I'm really inviting you to think along the lines of Van Genep and Victor Turner, that this is also a rite of passage. It's a ritual process. And you would also, in fact, think of, you'd also read the way this historian about Uganda, history of motherhood. I think Rhiannon Stevens. Rhiannon, yes. Now, if you read these three works from a historian, Rhiannon Stevens, How Become a Woman, history of motherhood, and then the ritual process, I think a kitchen party goes beyond the teaching of how to attend your husband, the positions that we are talking. It's also being part of an African culture. But then these teachings are part of it. It's a ritual process, a rite of passage, like Eliud has said, that you are now preparing a person to become a responsible woman. But it's also a mark, a transitional moment. And Victor Turner outlines 3 stages. One is liminality, you just enter in a liminal stage. But it's also communitas, and later on, after now this teaching, it is now a reintegration. You are now being integrated. You are now being assimilated into adulthood, but also into the society. So the kitchen party, what I find the kitchen parties in Zimbabwe, but of course elsewhere, is really a rite of passage, but it's also part of an African culture. So I think I would also perhaps invite you to think along these lines to broaden your argument. But second, in an African context, be it in Tanzania or even in Zimbabwe, marriage was also considered to be an institution. It's an institution of its own. And here now, it was not only women who are taught, and perhaps this would also perhaps define what qualifies to be a kitchen party. Now, is it only limited to women? And what about men who are also given this training, who are also being prepared, who are also being initiated? Because for instance, in our community, if you are really a young man, you can't be allowed to attend these gatherings of elderly men because you're not even married. But as soon as you get married, even if you are also 18 or 20 years, you are also considered to be an adult, and you are therefore invited to these discussions. So to what extent do these kitchen parties act or maintain the so-called the institution of marriage? But to what extent are these teachings preparing a lady to become, if we use the word of Rhiannon Stevens, to become now an African mother, or to become a mother in the family, but also in the society that surrounds her. So I find this to be rather complex, but very interesting, because it's also part of an African culture, and now it goes beyond the positions and what and of course the larger argument that we are making up as empowerment. Yes, it does. They do empower, but to what extent are these now linked to the larger society? Would also be perhaps be interesting for us to think about.
One last question, if you don't mind, and then I will let you answer by Karin, and then I think we stop there.
Yes, thank you, Elena. Very briefly. First of all, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, and I'm sorry for having been late. Hello, Salvatore, I'm really sorry for not being able to attend your presentation, but I have your paper and I will send you my comments afterwards. So thank you both for your presentations and your papers. Nathaniel, I would like to ask you if you could elaborate a bit on a topic that you mentioned in your paper about the economy, and so the advice that is given during these kitchen parties relating to the economic empowerment of these women and how they can be independent from their husbands. So you cite some examples. I would like to ask you if this is really a part of the training, of the kind of information that is given. So how to, for instance, register land properties, or you mentioned the example of buying nails and keeping the receipts, something like that. And also if it happens that also bride wealth payments are discussed during these meetings, given that they are organized just before the payment takes place. So the economic dimension, so to say, of the kitchen parties. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not sure whether I'll be able to answer some of the questions, but let me start with Nyanda's question. The idea of an African culture. Here are my tentative views on that. I am basically trying to move away from an idea of an African culture. That in part of Eastern Zambia, they have well-developed rite of passage institution. We don't have that among the Mashona where we come from. Mm-hmm. So this idea that we have an African culture, I think, is problematic to me. That's why I said when I was discussing maybe the evolution, the part of why this institution emerged in 1980 is as a result of people who had stayed in Zambia, Malawi, and also Tanzania, coming with what they had learned in this country. But we don't have the rite of passage rituals in Zimbabwe, at least among the Shona. There is one community, the Shangani, that's small minority that is on the border of Zimbabwe and South Africa. They do have that, but the rest, we don't have that. But of course, in our discussions with elders, we of course are taught, but we don't have rite of passage. So I was trying to move away from the idea of an African culture to see maybe African culture as maybe one and homogeneous. I think maybe that might be problematic, especially if we look at maybe kitchen parties. In Zimbabwe, yes, there was the influence of this local tradition, but we can't equate that tradition with maybe the traditions in Mozambique, not Mozambique, Malawi, Zambia, Tanzania. It's quite different. So it's the fusion of those cultures in an urban setting that we are having a new tradition culture that I call the counterfeited culture. Counterfeited in the sense that it's something new and a hybrid institution that came up as a result of women ignoring some norms and values and also inventing new ones. So it's something new in an urban setting. But of course, we trace this institution from different traditions. I think that's what I might say. Is it limited to women? One of the complaints of women, of course, in Zimbabwe is we are taught about this, we are taught about what to do in the bedroom, but men don't know what they are doing. So men, yes, we don't have the few they are trying to copy the Western, the branch and so on, but it's the recent activity. But it's a major complaint that men, they don't know what they are doing. So why are you inviting to these kitchen parties? You don't teach men how to handle women. So I think that's so big that I want to move away to the idea of an African culture, to take Africa as maybe one and homogeneous, the way differences communities. What are the audience and who organized these kitchen parties? As I said, by the late 1990s, there were at least two types of kitchen parties broadly. One organized by the church, and then a secular one organized by the aunt and close friends. The ones organized by the church usually is done in a church on the outside, and can be 300 people. Anyone who wants to come might come. So as a result, the message is don't do that. If the husband strays away, pray, kneel down. That's how women behave, and so on. There is no actual demonstrations of how you do it and so on, like what is done in kitchen parties. But the secular ones is close friends and the aunt that organize the kitchen parties. They organize, they invite close friends and also some relatives. It's usually maybe from 2 p.m. up to 4, 5. And then those who are respected among the audience, they are asked to leave. And then close friends and those who have hired then remain. That's when they are shown all these things, how to do it in the bedroom. In some cases, they even hire people, models, to demonstrate how to do it. So it's something really new, something that was not there, at least in the 1980s when this thing came on the scene. Yes, there is the influence of other social media, pornography, and so on. I interviewed once lady who is normally hired to speak on these kitchen parties. She is in her 50s. So she says, I normally tell them this, the best thing about maybe maintaining relations with relatives. But when it comes to sex, he says maybe there's a generational difference. So I normally tell them to go and watch pornography. So I see a radical shift from what was happening in the 1980s. So even maybe if you take the example of Tanzania or Zambia and so on, at kitchen parties, normally you don't refer people to watch pornography or to hire people to demonstrate how to do it. So this is the change we are trying to look at and say maybe this is changing, and then the change, I think, is good for women because it's empowering them. Not only because of this, but also looking at maybe the message under maybe the other question on empowerment. But if you hire a lawyer, normally the lawyers advise people, if you go into a marriage, make sure that your name is on each document. if you are registering a property, make sure that you register the property in a trust and you are a signatory in the trust.
Are there women lawyers and women doctors, or both, or maybe
Normally women lawyers who are invited.
Okay.
So it's a change that I see happen, kitchen parties. So you see maybe doctors, female doctors being invited, and they talk about sexual health, how to notice that maybe there's a sexual disease, how the symptoms and signs, and then what to do. This I see as maybe empowering. People talking about general grooming and how to end a business and so on. So these are topics that are now discussing kitchen parties. It's no longer about sex and how to maintain relations. So what I see maybe the major difference between East Africa, Malawi, and so on, among the Shona, we did not have this strong culture of a kitchen party or even this rite of passage that were there. So if you look at maybe colonial documents in the archives, you don't see anywhere where they are discussed. Unless if the colonial authority did a pretty good job early in the colonial period, that in the 50s, 60s, we no longer had this kitchen party thing. I must, of course, admit that there is a possibility, of course, that the educated elite also learn something from the white population. But those I have approached so far, the whites living in Zimbabwe, no one knows about maybe the origin of kitchen parties. They do not practice that. But of course, the name also suggests that. Then the other question was presents, rituals, Zanzibar bride is massage. I haven't heard about that happening in Zimbabwe. What I have heard is the hiring of models who come in their underwears, demonstrating how to do this exposition, how to do this massaging part. I haven't heard about it. It's probably there, but I haven't really heard about that. But I think it's an institution that is evolving every day, especially with the number of Zimbabweans now in the diaspora, coming back, they introduce new things and so on. The other question was on bride wealth existed. So talked about, normally a kitchen party happens after the payment of bride wealth, but before the wedding. Maybe it might be confusing for maybe European, but you, among the Shona, you are supposed to give permission to wed by the parents. And you can only be given that permission after you have paid the bride wealth. So it's that gap between the payment of lobola and the wedding that the kitchen party is conducted, not after or before. I think I tried to address most of the. Is there any question that I didn't address?
It seems to me that you tackled most of was carrying question, but you replied
about empowerment.
Yeah, but okay. And also we are way over time, but it was too passionate, so we couldn't stop you and listen to your answer. So we are really grateful for your presentation, both of you, and you really deserve a clap. Of course, I invite you to continue asking questions. They are around. Salvatore will be leaving on the 23rd, but you will be staying until the 2nd of February. So please feel free to go and see them, to discuss further those super interesting things. I think we should have had maybe one day to listen to all the different things that we wanted to ask, we wanted to ask you too about, or you would be happy to have a 2-hour presentation about this topic, but 30 minutes were anyway a good taste of it.
Thank you. I benefited from the questions and also the suggestions. I think about maybe some of the questions that I answered, probably not without reading some of the words that I was referred to. But so what I responded to is my current thinking that I think is always evolving. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Daniel is also thanking your presentation for your presentation. Great. Bye-bye to the audience by Zoom.
Bye-bye.
And,
Thank
see
you.
you next time. Thank you. Bye.